Welcome to week 9, day 35 of the spring 2025 Web Technologies course. So first, just, I wanted to kind of also mention, again, I mentioned it yesterday, there is a job fair downtown St. Louis on March 5th at it's between 9 and 11. And obviously you guys are in the earlier part of the technology program, but if you're interested in going, just please let me know if you think you're going to go. I should be going myself, so just let me know. Not a big deal either way. Just want to let you know that will be held, and if you're interested, please do attend. And then we're just going to go ahead and go over chapter 5, how to test and debug a JavaScript application. And actually, before that, though, I really kind of wanted to kind of go over just some basic concepts as far as how organizations work and kind of the development life cycle. Because I think this testing stuff kind of falls in with some of this. From a developer standpoint, we do testing within the development phase, but just kind of want to show you kind of how things fit together within an organization, within a development team, or just the complete organization. So first, I want to talk about the software development life cycle. Let me bring that up here. So basically, this is not something you're going to be tested on. This is more background knowledge. But I think it's important. It's important to know this. This is one of those other areas. If you can kind of, when you're in an interview in the future, you can kind of weave some little piece of this into the conversation. It's always good. Especially hiring managers like to hear certain things like this. That you kind of understand this whole life cycle, because any kind of not even a large organization, but any kind of really professional organization, even if it's a small company, they've got a development life cycle, and they have certain ways of doing things, right? So just kind of want to go through the 6 stages of software development life cycle, and even the number 6. So this isn't like written in concrete, like this is the only way, and every company follows this. Some have different stages, they do it differently, but this is kind of a common type development life cycle. Okay, so here you got your first phase, which is planning, and this is the foundation stage where the project's goals, scope, all of that's decided. So usually this is done with usually higher level people, management. Also, within an organization, when you're building when you're building a software application, there's going to be what's kind of called stakeholders, and them are the people that this application is important to. Now, those stakeholders could be someone, if you're like a consultant company where you're building an application for an outside company, all right, outside person, organization, company, one of the stakeholders, the stakeholders are going to obviously be them, right? Also, the stakeholders are going to be people with your organization that are impacted by this application. There's other, besides just you being part of a development team, you're not the only person that's, really cares about this application being built. There's other people that, care about the success of this application to be built, right? So in that case, like I was saying, you can have an outside company, but also you might be building a software application, not necessarily, and I'm considering websites obviously within this, because it's the same concept. Websites, are full blown web applications, right? So also within your organization, there's different departments. Usually have like finance department, marketing department, all these different departments, right? Well, sometimes they have needs, so they say, we'd like to have an application for our department that, maybe it's maybe it's one of the departments where they're wanting to analyze all their competitors, right? And say that we want a application that lists all of our competitors, their expertise. I'm just throwing something out there, right? But there may be some kind of certain functionality, something that they want, and so they're wanting the development team, development team division to create an application for them. So in that case, the people in that division, they're kind of the stakeholders in this, right? So during the planning stage, right, and obviously, when these different divisions within an organization report to somebody up top, so they have to justify, hey, so this is going to cost some money, right? This isn't free. So first of all, that division say, hey, we want this application, and they have to say, hey, this is why this is worth building, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so then if it gets approved by people high up, then it goes into the planning phase of the life cycle, right? And so this is the foundation stage where project's goals, scope, and feasibility are determined. Is this a feasible product? Should we really be building this? And, that's all kind of decided there, right? It involves outlining the project's objectives, the resources needed, and a preliminary schedule. When do we need this? All that, right? And from there, you go ahead. So there's different people that can be involved in these different stages, right? And so for planning, a lot of developers probably are not going to be, unless it's a really small little organization, developers aren't really going to be involved in the planning, okay? But so as far as developers are pretty much in this implementation phase here, okay? And this can be, like I said, these stages could be called different things depending on, the organization and how they define their software development lifecycle, right? But so, most likely you wouldn't be involved, but just kind of understand that there's these different phases that have to happen before that software gets to you, right? And after that, there's the analysis phase. And so in this phase, the project team gathers and analyzes the user requirements to define the system's functionality. So in this case, sometimes, developers can be involved early. The earlier you get more people involved, sometimes the better, right? So in this phase, the project team gathers, analyzes the user requirements, right? To define what the system, the functionality of the system. It focuses on understanding the what of the system, not the how, right? So it's what we want, what's the reason for this application? What specific things do we want this application to do for us? And then after the analysis stage, you have the design stage, and here's where the team translates the requirements into a detailed blueprint for the software, okay? This includes architectural design, user interface design, database design, a layout, groundwork for the development, right? And we're looking at this from kind of a more than just little static websites, but that's not always the case either. That can also fit into this as well, okay? But a lot of applications are a little more complex than just static websites, right? But just even building a static website, there's a cost involved. Companies just don't build a static website if they feel they might have a need for a static website. There's a cost involved. Approvals need to be done, right? All of these things also would need to be followed. These different phases it would go through anyhow, right? And then, so here, a lot of times, so you're going to have different people with different roles, right, in these different phases. So a lot of times here, this architectural design, you're going to have usually a software architect in there. And software architect's usually someone who's probably worked in development. I don't want to give a percentage, but it's highly likely that this architect used to be a developer or, some very closely related type position and learned a lot throughout his career, and he becomes an architect, right? And so, usually like an architect, and then usually sometimes, organizations that have a lot of resources, have a lot of money, so to speak, they may have, architectural engineers or you know, architects. They could have development architects, software architects, user interface architects, database architects, right? It all depends, right? And sometimes this could be smaller organizations, smaller applications. This could kind of be maybe one person, or could, you know, could be multiple, right? And then different teams could be also involved in this, right? So then after design, you have implementation. So implementation is the stage 4 here. And implementation, this is where actual coding and development of the software take place, right? Developers write code based on design specification, building the software components. Same thing as, you know, building a website, right? This would, even if we're just building a website, you know, even, you know, just building a website, same thing goes as well here, right? So how, just kind of wondering, so how, and then you notice number 5 is testing and integration. Well, testing is actually, one thing I kind of wanted to explain is, you know, within this implementation, you know, this is where you're going to have a lot of developers. Sure, you're going to have other people with other roles. Obviously, there'll be a project manager, right? There might be systems analysts. There'll be other roles during this phase here, right? But this is this is, you know, very heavy in the development cycle, right? A lot of development's going on. And then you have testing integration, right? So this is kind of how it's kind of why I kind of wanted to bring this up is there's, you know, the development phase and then there's the testing phase. Now, the testing phase is, you know, this is where, you know, the software is rigorously tested and identified and rectify any defects or bugs, right? And so usually this could be developers could be involved, and obviously developers will be involved to some extent in this, but also there's people, there's individuals that are testers, right? They're testers within the organization. And so that they would be involved in this a lot more here, right? But I just kind of wanted to bring it up, like, so during the development life cycle, you actually do still test your software. So as a developer, you're usually what's called unit testing. So like you have a function, right? You write a function. Well, in the real world, we haven't really done it here, but in the real world, you're going to want to have some code. You're going to use some kind of a framework probably, right? That actually tests that function to make sure if you pass it good, if you pass it, you know, if you pass it the right things, it'll work. If you pass it the wrong things, if it, you know, then it handles it without blowing up and, you know, you're getting a big error, your page not displaying or anything like that, right? So you want to handle the wrong data coming in, right? You want to make sure that when the data comes in, it either works, or if it doesn't work, you're gracefully doing something from there, right? It could be a validation that tests to see, hey, this is wrong. It sends a message back to the user, right? So a lot of this stuff is really part of testing your individual code, right? Like that is really part of unit testing, and that's really still part of this cycle, right? This testing integration, this is where you've already done all your little unit testing. You tested your functions, but then you've got a testing team that comes back on top of that and does their own testing, okay? And then also your application may integrate with other things. You can integrate with other services, right? So when that happens, you know, you need to make sure that your application's working with some other application. Let's say your application connects to a database, right? So you need to make sure that you can connect to that database and so forth, right? And so usually, a lot of times too, in the development site stage, you're hitting a different database than a production database. You don't hit in organizations where you're doing development. During development, you are not accessing the production database. That's different. Most of the time in organizations, you would not even have access to that production database because that's just how it works, right? Usually, it's a different database. And then after that, you have a maintenance phase. And after deployment, this phase focuses on ongoing support, updates and bug fixes, and so forth. It ensures that the software remains functional, secure, and meets evolving needs over time. So as a developer, you could be involved in multiple different of these stages, but obviously this is the main stage for a developer, right? And like I said, kind of the biggest point I was, a few different points I'm trying to make is there's different people that are involved in the whole process, right? And especially when you start talking about testing, right? And like I said, there's unit testing where you're testing that basic functionality of each little function that you use, right? And when you're doing things like that, that's really involved in this phase. Where there's also a phase that's a testing integration phase, and this is where you've got other people that are basically testing your software. They're checking to make sure, does this meet those requirements, right? Because you define these requirements, you build your software, and when you're building your software, well, did each piece of your software actually meet the requirements that were assigned, right? And that happens in this phase, right? It's your job to make sure that you did do that, but this phase we're going to test to make sure you did do that, okay? So just kind of wanted to bring this up, and this isn't, like I said, this is kind of early to be bringing this stuff up, maybe more in the second year and stuff, but just wanted to know that there's the companies, any kind of a reasonable size company, and usually, I would say any company, but, like one person shops or a small little 5 or 10, they might do things a lot different, right? Small little companies. But when you get any kind of a, multiple employees, multiple projects, they're going to follow some kind of a software development lifecycle, right? Larger companies, it's going to be more complex. There's going to be a lot more tools. There's going to be a lot more money invested in the whole software development lifecycle, right? So, it's important just to kind of understand the basics of this and just, understand that, you're not just like in an island. There's other people that are involved in, getting an application from the very beginning all the way to production, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and look at so I just kind of want to go through the study guide for the chapter 5. And another reason I really wanted to go over that software development lifecycle, because in here, this testing phase, they look at this as more from a development standpoint, but and that's what we're kind of doing. But you understand that testing is more than just you doing some certain little things. There's other people involved in the whole testing phase. Okay. So as far as debugging versus testing, debugging is defined as the process of identifying and fixing errors in software application, right? The purpose of debugging, the primary goal is to ensure the application's functions correctly meets the intended requirements. Debugging versus testing. Testing involves finding errors, right? Bugging involves fixing those errors, right? Testing's finding, debugging's fixing. So testing phases, testing with valid data, testing with invalid data, and then trying to make an application fail, right? And so really a lot of times when you do build things, you want to try to make it fail. You want to try to make it fail. You want to enter a bunch of crap data to see if it fails, because you need to handle those situations, right? Because users going to do some crazy things. You could, your team could be building an application, but you guys, from that standpoint, you're entering data that you think, that kind of makes sense for the fields and stuff like that. Users do all kinds of crazy things, right? So, you've got to really try to, you've got to work on those edge cases where people do some strange things, right? And actually when, there's one place I worked, this tester, what they used to do, one of the first things did, um, um, and this was kind of like click. Sometimes you do. There's different kinds of testing as far as when you get to that test stage. That when you have other people testing your, there's sometimes there's usually automated type testing, but then there's also just a person sitting there banging away and seeing what they can do. And this lady, what she used to do, this one tester, she used to take this form. Usually, we were building a lot of different forms, right? So you had a lot of data, and she would come in and she'd just go crazy, putting in all kinds of special characters. She just putting all kinds of junk in there that's not supposed to be in there, and then she'd hit the submit button and see what happens, right? And a lot of times, things would fail because she would come up with little things that wow, because developers weren't thinking about that, right? So it's just kind of interesting nowadays. There's actually and it's the whole process has kind of evolved where a lot of time if you're doing quality work, you should already have those identified. But it was just kind of interesting back then. This kind of earlier stages of development, web development, and so things weren't defined as well as they are now, and as far as the frameworks and the testing tools. So, but yeah, she just used to enter crazy data all over the place and then click submit and see what happens, right? But here in the testing phases, talked about testing with valid data, running an application with inputs that are within the range, and verify it works, and then test it with invalid data, running applicants with outside the expected range or format, and then trying to make the application fail, actively attempting to find edge cases and scenarios that might cause the application to crash or produce incorrect results. Okay. One thing I did want to go over with you. So also there's a concept that's been around for a while. It's called test-driven development. And obviously, you're not going to be tested on this or anything. It's just kind of background information. Just so if you've heard of it, just like the SDLC, the standard development lifecycle. It's good just to that you heard that before, right? And here's test-driven development, and it's a software development practice where developers write automated tests before writing the actual code to be tested. Okay, developers create unit test cases before developing the actual code. It's an iterative approach combining programming, unit testing, unit test creation, and refactoring. And this has this idea of different phases: red phase and green phase and refactor. So basically what you do is you write this test. You write this test to fail at the beginning. You write, so let's just say you're expecting, you already know that what this is a function, like you're going to be creating a function, right? And you already know you're expecting this to return a number. So what you're going to do is you're going to build your test to fail if it's at the beginning, right? And so, writes a test that defines a desired feature or behavior as the test will fail initially. And then you write your code so that your code makes the test pass. Okay. So you're basically, returning a if it's supposed to return a number, you're returning a string, right? So you make it fail at the beginning, and then you write your code so it passes. And then the other part after the red phase, green phase, refactor. Finally, the code is refactored for optimization while ensuring that the test still passes. So just want to bring this one up, test-driven development. You can read a little bit about this yourself. It's just a specific way to do the, it's a way to do the development where you're really extensiating the using testing as opposed to just writing all your code and then testing it. All right. So there's different types of errors. There's syntax errors, and syntax errors occur when the code violates grammatical rules of the language. You know, it's like misspelled keywords, missing semicolons, etc. Now I know the editors will usually find them, but not always. Right. The JavaScript engine usually detects these errors before or during the loading of the page as well. Right. Syntax errors prevent the code from executing. Then there's runtime errors. Runtime errors, these occur during the execution of an application. They arise from actions that the JavaScript engine cannot perform. Example, dividing by zero, accessing an undefined variable. Okay. And runtime errors typically cause the application to stop executing. Right. So the difference kind of really between this syntax errors and runtime errors, you have a syntax error that's pretty much going to fail from the very beginning. Right? Runtime errors is everything, you know, you might wrote everything, but then all of a sudden, based on something that happens within that, you end up getting an error after the fact, so to speak, right? That's causes the application to stop executing. It does start, but something causes it to stop. Then there's logic errors. These are the most difficult to detect. The code executes without errors, but it produces incorrect results. You know, logic errors are due to flaws in the programming logic or algorithm. And then there's floating point precision. And, you know, I know we went through an example of this yesterday. Be aware that floating point arithmetic in JavaScript can sometimes lead to small imprecisions due to how numbers are represented in binary. And it's basically when you do a when you're using 0.01 plus 0.02, it's not going to return 0.03, right? And so that's one of the things about floating points that you have to be aware of. And it can cause unexpected results when comparing floating point numbers for equality. And I know we did that the other day. Mitigation techniques like rounding to a specific number by using the to-fix, that can help to address that issue. And then also you can use, sometimes you may want to still keep the floating point number, even though it's in multiple decimal places. And you can do something where you've got a range, where a tolerance. Is it between this and this tolerance level? If it is, then you're fine, right? And I'll show you an example of that here today. Strict mode. So we already seen strict mode as a feature that enforces stricter parsing and error handling in JavaScript. It helps catch common coding mistakes and prevents the use of potential problematic features. How it works: to enable strict mode, you add use strict at the beginning of your script or function. So, you know, generally you just kind of want to keep it at the top of your file, but, you know, for some reasons you know, let's just say you took over an application and it's your responsibility, you know, as a new employee at this company, this is an application that you're responsible for. Maybe it's got a lot of legacy code, older code in there, and if you put a use strict at the beginning, it's all going to fail. But, you know, they don't want you fixing everything right now. You know, you've got other priorities, and they just want you to add some certain functionality. Well, you can just that new functionality, you can just, maybe you wrote a few new functions, and then you can just use strict in those specific functions, so it wouldn't cause problems in other places in the file, right? Effect of undeclared variables. When using strict mode, attempt to use an undeclared variable result in an error. We've seen that before, right? If you just you don't give it the keyword, right? If you don't give it the keyword var or let or const, and it will result in an error. Without strict mode, the engine would just create a global variable, right? Which could be fine, not necessarily, but you might not really want that to happen, right? Usually it's something, you know, you usually should control what you can control and not just let things happen. And when you just define a variable without the keyword, either var, let, or const, you're pretty much, you know, automatically just allowing the JavaScript engine to decide how to define that, and it's going to define that as a global variable. And then here, just the Chrome developer tools, which we've looked at a lot. And We're going to look at a little bit more of that today as far as different levels of logging. We've been doing the console.log. Console.log is basically using the info. There's different stages. There's different ones to use. Different levels, not stages, different levels. And I'll show you a little bit about that. And we're going to go ahead and put some breakpoints in our code and see how you can put a breakpoint in your JavaScript code to actually run through the code. Trace code execution. And obviously, we've done a lot of this console.log stuff because kind of we're doing this from the beginning, even though the book kind of introduced this a little later on, not at the beginning. I kind of introduced this at the beginning because I think it's a very powerful tool to use. All right. So let's go ahead and look at some code here. So here I've just got this HTML file. Got some buttons here, and I've got a validate form here. Well, I've got a form, and I'm actually calling a function called validate form. Okay, I'm going to take a quick look at that too. So let's go back here. So here's a validate form, and this is basically based on this HTML here. Okay, you've got return here. So when you do an on submit for a form, it's going to submit this, right? It's going to submit this form because we've seen this before when we worked on the forms, the HTML forms. If you click the button, it's going to submit a form, right? So, especially when you've got type being submit, right? If you got type being submit, it's going to submit that form, right? But what this will do on submit, if this validate form returns false, it won't submit it. If it returns true, it will submit it, okay? So let's look at this. So we got this validate form. So let's go ahead. Let's see what we're doing. We're parsing if it's a number. We're doing coloring parse number. Turn false. So let me put some letters in here on the right hand side here on the form in the browser, kind of at the bottom here, but I'm going to just put in some letters and hit enter, right? So let's go ahead and see what happened with that, right? We put in some letters, things disappeared. Let's see what happened with that, right? So what we can do here is I got to get this all situated here. There we go. Let me get to JavaScript. So in here, what we can do is we put a breakpoint. Okay. Now, when I put in some letters and I hit submit, it's going to stop at that breakpoint. All right. And then we can actually run through. Now, yours might be on how the developer tool stuff is kind of configured on yours, because you can move these things around a little bit, so it might look a little different on yours. The important thing is make sure you go under sources to get the JavaScript file. It's going to be under sources, right? And you can just click this, put the breakpoint. So it actually stopped right here, right? And then when we go ahead, and now down here is the controls, right? So here we've got step over. Well, the first one is just continue. This is just going to resume the script execution, right? This is going to step over to the next function call. This is going to step into the next function call. And this is going to step out of the current function, okay? So you have different options there. All right. So here we're doing that. So we're going to go ahead and click step over. So this is going to go to the next line, right? So you can hover over this. If you hover over this, actually it's bringing back the whole This is showing you actually the whole input field, okay? This is showing you the whole input field. You're not doing a dot value on that. That's just the whole input field, right? Get element by ID. Yep, so that's just getting you the whole input field. So then you can keep on going over this, and then we're going to go to the next one, and then we're going to try to parse this, right? We're going to try to parse this. And this is not a number. And then we're doing not a number times 5 and putting that value back in there, right? That's not going to turn out very well, right? So here you've got if this input number input, actually we don't want to do that like that, but that's okay. Probably really want to do that, don't we? I'll make a start over here. So basically, what's now, since we put in letters here, I had to change that, sorry. So then it's going to come in here and make this an error, and it's going to return false, right? So all of this was kind of wrong, right? We were checking for the wrong thing, checking for the wrong thing here. So now it's going to return false. And if we finish it, it's going to come back, please enter a valid number, right? So let's do this again. Here, and I do want to point out here on this also. So let's say, so sometimes, you might have a big function, or you might start debugging. One function calls another function. And so you may want to have multiple breakpoints in different places, right? So in this case, we're going to start with this here. So I'm going to go ahead and put the bad data in here, and I'm going to hit submit again. And so here we're going to go ahead and I just want to show you, if you hit resume here, right? This is resume down here at the left bottom. If you hit resume here, it's going to actually go to the next line where you have a breakpoint. If you didn't have that breakpoint, so let's just refresh this. If you didn't have that breakpoint, it's just going to finish the whole execution, right? It's going to finish the whole execution. So, okay, so where were we? So let's go ahead this time and let's put in a valid number and hit submit. And we're just going to walk through this. You can always go over, if you hover over these, they're going to tell you what it has. This is basically the input file, the input text field, right? The ID of its number input, right? And then here the error. This is actually a span tag. This is the span tag that you created. That was created. It has an ID of error, right? And that's in the HTML. If you go look at the HTML. So here, even though this is still not a number, right? So let's see what happens here. Oh, that's because I do need to mention that whenever you change something in here, it doesn't really change it for good, right? It's only during the execution of this thing. So actually, let's just go over here and change it. Let's go ahead and change this here. So it's changed for good, because it's just going to change it within your thing. Once you hit refresh, it's going to go back to the original code, right? But in this case, I did save here. And just to be sure, let me open this live server again. All right. Close this one up. All right. So let's go back here. Let's do an F12 on this one. So where are we at now? Okay, so now we've got it like this. Let's just go ahead and put a numbers in here. And let's hit submit. So I'm going to go over this. We got number input. And so what's wrong here? It's still not a number. Why is it not a number still? Well, that's because we did not get the value, right? We didn't get the value. If we change this to dot value, I'll hit save there, and we'll start over. Okay, now we've got the value. So we got 555. So we're going to multiply that by 5. That's going to be a big number. And then we're going to go forward here on that, right? So now if parse.in, so here it's actually going to come down here and display none for the error, and we're going to return true. And so if we just click continue here, it actually submitted. It's just coming back and reloading the page, but the date is gone, right? Whereas if we just went ahead and entered, and we probably lost our, we have to be careful because we probably lost our dot value. So let's go over here and just put that in here. So that was under the JavaScript, and we just want to do this to dot value here, right? Save that. Now we got that. Let's see how this looks now. We got our dot value in there. It's good. So if we put in letters and we hit submit, I'm just going to go ahead and return it. Please enter a valid number, right? So that's how that works. And like I said, especially when you use it on a refer, if you have this return here, this is going to return true or false. If this returns false, it's not going to submit the form. And in this case, when I put in letters, alphanumeric characters, it's going to go ahead and not submit the form because it's going to return false, and it's going to put this error, all right? If the returns true, it's actually going to end up submitting the form, okay? So that's that. So we went through how to do breakpoints. Something just play with. This is just something you can just go ahead and play with, try it, see what works. You even have breakpoints down here, right? You can do a different way to turn them off, turn them back on again, or obviously you can just click it again, right? All right. So the next thing I want to do is look at console types. So let's open this up a bit. So under console, right, we've got there's this drop down called development levels. So by default, it's going to have info, warnings, and errors. It's not going to have verbose. Now, when you do console.log, that's actually info. I think console, they've kind of moved on a little bit from some of it and using different ones. So let's just do this. Console.info, and then let's just do. Oh, it helps if I spell that right. So test. So console.info is really the same as console.log. Okay, just to let you know that. Console.log's fine, but it's a kind of a newer way to do it. They've kind of moving away from it, but it still works. The console.log. So you got console.info. There's also the idea of console. We can do the same thing here. Let me get over here. You can also do console.warning here, all right? And this is, what did I do wrong? Obviously, I haven't done this in a little while. Let me go look at the code real quick. That's probably the easiest place to do this. These are console.logs. I thought I did some warnings as well. Oh, yeah, here. Oh, the warned. Okay. Console debug, info, warn, error. Okay. So basically the same thing here. Let me just get rid of that. So this gives gives you a little icon here for warning, right? And then if you do error, you're going to get something that looks like that, an error, the X icon, right? And that's what I got an error here, just by putting in the wrong thing. But then also you've got let's do this one. There's the debug one, right? So let's see what happens with that. Nothing happened at all. And the reason for that is if you come up with the default levels here, debug is more for adding a lot of debugging code. A lot of times developers, especially when they're like hitting different systems, or there's like, we want to test a lot of things in this function. So they got all these different console.log file, console.logs all over the place, whatever. So one thing you can do is instead of using that, console.log is basically the same as console.info, like I said. But if you want to show, like during development, you might want to show a whole bunch of logging statements. Well, when this thing goes to production, you don't necessarily, there is a cost involved with, especially if there's a whole bunch of statements, you got a complex application and you're printing out a lot of statements. You probably don't want to be doing that in a production type situation. But during the development stage, you may want to have all of that. So what you can do is actually come in here and click verbose. And then if we run this, it'll print it out. Okay. So you could have a whole bunch of different ones during development, right? You can always use that. And by default, users aren't changing this, because they wouldn't know what to do here. The only reason a user would have this set to verbose would be by accident somehow. Developers that are using the developer tools, they understand this, but your common user's not going to understand that, right? So by default, if I click default here, it's going to get rid of the verbose one here, right? And then also you can always, if you really wanted to, you can get rid of that one as well, right? So here we're just got warning and errors. So, there might be some cases that you want to do it like that. You might have just a bunch of info statements. So I don't want this. I just want to see my warning and errors, right? So if I do a test, that's not going to work, right? If I do info, which is the same, that's not going to work either, right? And like I said, that's the same as console.log. So if we just do a console.log here, right? If we do that one here, same thing. So basic log is same as info. Okay. So that's not showing either, right? That's because we have our custom levels, just warning and errors, right? If I do come in here and go ahead and change this to the warning one, there's your warning, and then this one's the error, right? So this is only showing the warnings and the errors, and not the others. But by default, it's best just to go ahead and select default. And this is how it is out of the box when you download Chrome. And I'm sure that 99 point whatever of the basic users out there, this is how it's going to be on theirs. And they may never even know how to get to see this anyhow, right? Because it's just not common. It's a tool for developers, right, to use. But, just the important thing to really understand here is if you want to go ahead and put in a lot of fine-grained statements, like, after a lot of different, there might be some complex stuff you're doing in a function and you want to log every single little, after every line or something, then go ahead and do the console.debug, right? And that way it won't show up only if you chose for it to show up by clicking that, right? All right. Let's see what else I got here. Okay, and so I have this other file here. So what I'm going to go ahead and do. So syntax error. So in this case, here's the syntax error. So I'm just going to go ahead and uncomment this out. And this is just complaining because it's a duplicate. Oh, no. It's complaining because there's something missing up here. So obviously, the editor is going to complain about syntax errors, or pick them up pretty much. But, this is just, a common thing people do. They forget to put the end parentheses here, so if you put the end parentheses, you're fine. Just that's considered a syntax error, right? Same thing if, the wrong variables, right? You've got you passing in a width and a height, right? And then here, but what if here you have it misspelled, right? Now that, it's kind of interesting, right? So, that's not going to work, right? Let's go check that out. I thought that would kind of complain about that, and so I'm kind of surprised here. All right, I thought the editor would complain. Let's open this with live server. Flip this. So I'm going to hit developer tools here. What do I want to do here on this? Okay, so I'm going to bring up developer tools. I'm going to call this. I'm going to pass in just 5 and a 5. I am surprised. Did I not save this? I am really surprised. I'm being dumb. It's doing this one here. So there you go. So, basically that's a syntax error, right? That's a syntax error. This is missing closing parentheses. You got the wrong thing. But even though the editor did pick this up, that's a syntax error. You had the wrong variable, right? Wrong variable name, I should say. So attempt to access a property of undefined. So in this case, yeah, you can't let an object. Well, what you're doing here is you've created this object, right? Let's just get rid of this for right now, this second. 8 is not defined. Let's fix that one. So this in itself is fine right here. My object, which is null. This is line 20. That's another thing. You know, I know we looked at it a little bit, but you know, whenever you use this console and stuff, it's going to tell you what line it's on. This is line 20, right? And this is just saying that this is null. And this is fine. This is fine to set a variable like this to null. But what you can't do is try to like do a dot property, do a property on an object. So objects have properties and methods, right? So you can't do a property on a null, right? So this is going to return you an error, right? So this would be considered a runtime error. You know, the editor did not pick this up as a problem, but it is a problem once it's executed. This is a problem, right? So that'd be a runtime error. I would really call this a syntax error though, but I don't know why I didn't pick that up. That's kind of interesting. So here's a logic error, incorrect calculation. So here's the corrected. So basically, you know, this is a logic error, whereas, you know, this works, right? This works fine. Let's go ahead and so I'm going to go ahead and do that here. So let's get rid of that. So that's not in our way. So down here, line 27. A, B, C, down. So basically here, so here, you know, it's just showing that a logic error is where you did it wrong, right? I'm not sure why it'd be showing quite like that, but that's okay. Oh, duh. So here I need to pass in some numbers, right? So here's calculate average with these numbers. So the reason this is a logic error is because you're wanting to do an average, right? Well, and this is actually the correct one, but if we go ahead and comment this one out, and then uncomment this one out. So this is coming 14 because this is a logic error because this a plus b plus c divided by 3, right, is the wrong way to do average because it's what it's going to do. It's going to do this division first, right? So it's going to take c, you know, depends on what you passed it, right? But c, so if let's make this something else. So that's a 6. 6 divided by 3 is going to be 2, right? 2 plus 8 is 10, plus 5 is 15, and that's 15. But this is a logic error because you're wanting to calculate average, and you're not calculating average because your equation is wrong. You need to include this in parentheses, A, B, and C, then divide it by 3, right? And then also we have this here, which is floating point result, which we looked at this the other day, right? Where you can actually take 0.1 plus 0.2, and what it's going to result, it's going to return because of floating point, and just the way floating points work, it's not going to be rounded perfectly, right? So one way to get around that, you could do the to fixed on this, right? You could do dot to fixed, and that's, I believe, what we did yesterday as well, right? And we just go ahead and do this as 2 decimal places. right? And that would correct that, right? But, you know, there might be situations, you know, you're doing some scientific stuff. You really maybe want some you might want to keep the original number, right? For scientific things, documentation purposes, you may want to keep that long, you know, with the multiple, you know, trailing zeros for your decimal place, right? But there, what you can actually do in that scenario is you can actually do like do a tolerance here, right? So you're actually doing a tolerance so that it's between a certain amount, right? And as long as it's between a certain amount, then they can be equal, okay? They can be equal. So there's just an example of that. All right. Process data accidentally creates a global variable. Yeah. Well, it's just showing you this process data is just creating a global variable, data outside the function. And then obviously, if you go here to your top of your file or anywhere in here, your file, even here, right? So if we do what use strict, right? That's going to change things for us, right? Oh, I got to get rid of the. Use strict is going to complain about that, right? Data is not defined. Change this to a var, which really shouldn't be using, right? You change this to a let. All right, process strict. So yeah, well, you were seeing an error over here. It really wasn't this error here. It's actually this error here because it's just it's accessing this because it's global. It's not global anymore. Once we put it's not global anymore, right? So just want to let you know that error after we made that change to make this a let, the reason you see another error is actually an error on this, right? Because you're trying now it's global, right? If you got rid of this, you're going to get an error here because of the use strict. If you got rid of the use strict, everything would work, right? Because this is fine. It just creates this as a global, and now you're accessing this because it's a global variable, right? So, example of calling this function. All right. I don't think I'm going to go through that. All right. Not too much more here today. Let's look at. I don't really think there's much for me to look at in the assignment. But let's go ahead and take a look here. Maybe I didn't bring that up. Yeah, let me go grab that real quick. Here it is. So there's Chapter 5 lab and Chapter 5 homework. Chapter 5 homework's just the doing the free code camp stuff. So just the same as what you've been doing. I think you need 80% on that. And not really much to talk about here as well. You know, just similar to what we've already done here. I don't know if there's much for me to go over. This shouldn't be too bad. You know, just you're using the Chrome developer tools and etc. But not really much to go over on this. So just let me know if you have any questions about it. So, but that's all I have for today. Please let me know if you have any questions.